Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I will be reviewing one of your resumes and giving my tips on how to improve it. So if you're interested, please stay tuned. In one of my previous videos where I gave you guys resume tips, I promised that I will pick one of you to review your resume. And today I picked a candidate. His name is Jacob, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Forgive me please if I'm not pronouncing it correctly and correct me in comments. Anyway, I picked his resume and today in this video I will review it and give my thoughts and tips on how to improve it. Let's get started. First and foremost, let's get started with design and format. I really love how Fetty put his resume on one single page because for me as a potential recruiter and an employer, I just have one page to go through and he has all the relevant information on that one page. Another thing that I really like about his resume is the design. It's very clear, nicely formatted. I have some comments about the formatting of how to make it better, but overall the blue and the white create a nice contrast. It's easy to read. The font he picked is nice and overall all the relevant information jumps into my eyes right away, which is great. This is what you should aim for in your resume. I will give a disclaimer that I am reviewing your resume as if you were to apply for jobs in the US. So it's a disclaimer because in Europe, for instance, rules around what you put on your resume are slightly different. In the States, you're not supposed to put any personal information like your date of birth, your nationality, your gender. It's actually a super huge faux pas and it's not even allowed to ask someone in an interview any of those questions. It can be actually legally prosecuted. So please do not put any personal information on your resume, like your gender, nationality, so stuff like Fetty put. Again, it's a disclaimer, that's what it's true for the US. It might be different in Europe and in other countries in the world. I like how Fetty has a whole section on links because it's very easy for me to click on his LinkedIn profile, on his portfolio and find out more about him. So that's really good. Let's get started with his actual section. I do like how he mentioned a quick blurb at the top of what he's looking for. It's absolutely not necessary, but the way he did it is quite nice and concise and I know exactly what he's looking for. I also really love how he put experiences at the top and his education at the bottom. I mentioned it in my previous video that experience, if you have experience, is way more relevant most of the times than your education, unless of course you're applying for a research role and your PhD at a school and the papers you wrote are much more important. So of course use your own judgment for what you're looking for, but for his specific scenario, since he's looking for a software developer role, it's really good that he put his experience at the top. I do have one suggestion for him in terms of formatting. I would align all the paragraphs in all the sections. So you can see that in his experience section, his paragraph and margins alignment is slightly different than his alignment in the education section. It's not a huge deal, but your goal as a person who is trying to get that role is to make it as easy as possible for a recruiter, employer, or whoever it is to scan your resume. So because the margins are different, I, as a person viewing his resume, have to jump with my sight from section to section. And again, it's not a huge deal, but it would be nice if everything was aligned exactly the same way through the sections. Another formatting suggestion that I have is using the same language in all the bullet points. For example, in his experience section, he starts with a strong verb, helped, developed, etc. But in his education section, he goes, I followed, I this, I that. That is slightly inconsistent and I would really recommend him to use the same language throughout all of the sections. So instead of I followed, he would change it to followed. Remove the I, because in other sections he doesn't have the I at the front. So be as consistent as possible. These were my comments with respect to formatting. Now let's dive deep into actual sections. Let's start with experience. In his first role, he is a freelance iOS developer, and it looks like he helped several clients develop new features, develop iOS applications, or fix bugs. My take on this is super generic, and you should really hone down and give actual examples of what you did. Because it's really generic, it doesn't allow me as a person who's reading his resume to actually kind of figure out how experienced he is. Developed an application is super generic. Was it an alarm application, a calculator application, or was it something super complex where multiple servers had to be involved and the application had to process a lot of data? What was the complexity of these applications? What was the complexity of the features of these applications? What was the impact of these applications? What did the applications actually do, as I said? I would really work on this. I would explicitly state, developed, let's say, an Uber. I will be using actual applications that exist. Developed an Uber-like application for a client where the user could book a ride, could track the ride. I used GPS, Google Maps. I used multiple databases to store user information, to store their ride history. I would go as concise and as deep as you can into telling the story. Your resume is a story about your experience. So please make sure that you can impress me with the knowledge that you have, with the work that you've done. And even if it's something as simple as fixing bugs, some bugs can actually be really obscure and complicated, which shows me as your potential employer that you have attention to details, that you care about your clients. Maybe you fixed a bug that a lot of insurance companies were so struggling with and weren't able to process insurance claims. That has a huge impact. So please show that impact in your resume. And again, I would separate that section to actually explicitly state what clients, what apps you worked on, and what features, as opposed to generalizing it into one sentence. Same goes for your second experience role, the iOS developer at Waymo or Vame. Again, please apologize me for my pronunciation if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. You're just generically stating that you worked on a few iOS business related applications. Same thing goes as for the first experience section. Please be specific in what these business applications were, what their impact was, what was your involvement and role in developing these applications. And the same goes for the last two experiences. I'm not going to go into a ton of details. I hope you get the message. Try to be as explicit as possible, tell a good story, show me what impact you've had, include metrics wherever you can, so that I can be impressed with how much work you've done and how big of an impact it had, and I can have a clearer understanding of what those iOS apps even were. One last tip that I have for the experience section is when you hone down those bullet points and provide me with more specific things that you've done, make sure that you use strong verbs. Anything that sounds actionable and strong, worked, developed, impacted, collaborated, created, use those strong verbs. It's very important. Education section. For Fadi's education section, he actually elaborates on what kind of things he has done in his educational institution experience. I would say that is not actually necessary because, again, the sentences that he uses are quite generic. I followed a few mathematical research courses. If you were to state what actual courses you followed, maybe there is a course that is really relevant to the job that you're trying to apply for. For instance, he's trying to get an iOS he's trying to get a software developer role and his experience is mostly on iOS. So if maybe he was early on in his career and didn't have enough experience, he could actually state that he took iOS development courses in university because that would be relevant. Otherwise, I would say it's not necessary to elaborate on education. I would say it's enough to state your education experience and years when you completed your education or not, but it's not actually necessary to go ahead and elaborate on each one of those experiences. And last but not least, we have his technical skills section. I do really like that he put the technical skills on his resume because it might potentially have a lot of buzzwords, and it's not uncommon for a recruiter that is not actually hands-on technical to look through a resume, so they would kind of know the words that they would have to look for, like Ruby, Java, a certain framework, something like that. I would say that it's not necessary to elaborate on the level of your experience in the technical section. In Fadi's particular case, he had a lot of space on his resume left to do so that is okay. But with my suggestions of making his experience section more elaborate and more concise, more storytelling, I would predict that he probably wouldn't have enough space for such an elaborate technical skills section, which is totally okay. If he tells a good story in his experience section, he can actually state how advanced he was in using certain technologies because he actually applied them in his work experience, so that in his technical skills section, he can merely just mention iOS development, Swift, etc., etc. That was about it for me, guys. I hope you enjoyed this drill down on one of your resumes. Thank you so much, Fadi, for giving me an opportunity to review your resume and giving you some tips. I hope that your newly edited resume will land you any job that you want and that you find these tips useful. If you guys are interested in having your resume reviewed in another video, please leave it in the comment section down below. I'm really willing to continue this series if you find them useful, so please share your opinion with me. And if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave your comments in the comment section down below. Put the notification button on to know when the new content is coming, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye for now.